Welcome to Sherlock Shadow Channel, where every story hides a secret. Grab your coffee, sit back, and dive into a world of twists and turns. Tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city and country in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share the thrill with fellow mystery lovers. Let the adventure begin. Hercule Poirot and the clue behind the ornamental clock. Chapter 1. The inciting incident. The lanterns along the veranda of Belgrave Manor cast long, wavering shadows across the manicured lawns, yet within the opulent drawing room, every corner gleamed with crystalline brilliance. Silk gowns rustled as guests drifted from alcove to alcove, their chatter mingling with the soft strains of a string quartet. It was an evening tailor-made for high society, a glittering fête to celebrate Lady Winifred Carrington's name day. And yet, somewhere beneath the glitter, a current of unease pulsed like a hidden heartbeat. At precisely 9:30, the festivities paused as Sir Reginald Carrington, master of the house, cleared his throat and lifted a champagne coupe. His jocular manner belied the tension in his grey eyes. "My dear friends," he began, voice steady yet edged with restraint, "what should have been a night of celebration has taken an unexpected turn. An artifact of great personal and historical value has been taken from this very room." A hush descended. Poirot, observing from a discreet corner near the fireplace, allowed a slight lift of the brow to betray his interest. Step by step, Sir Reginald led the assembly toward the far end of the room, where once stood a delicate 18th-century mantel clock. Its gilt casing, encrusted with miniature cameos and rubies, was now conspicuously absent. In its place, a faint circular outline pressed into the velvet drapery, as though time itself had been erased. The assembled guests drew in their breath. "Ladies and gentlemen," continued Carrington, "this clock has been in my family for generations. Though its monetary worth may pale beside its sentimental value, its disappearance strikes at the heart of my heritage, and, I dare say, at the very spirit of tonight's gathering." His gloved hand hovered over the empty space, fingers tracing the intricate dust pattern left behind. It was in that charged silence that Hercule Poirot stepped forward, his little grey cells already whirring with curiosity. He wore a midnight blue dinner jacket, his cravat immaculately tied, and his silver moustaches curled with purposeful precision. He inclined his head in greeting. "Sir Reginald," he said in measured tones, "might I examine the mantelpiece? The precise placement of dust and any residual impressions often reveal more than one suspect's." Carrington, though taken aback, nodded. "By all means, Monsieur Poirot." The guests parted, forming a respectful semicircle. Poirot knelt gracefully, his gloved fingertips tracing the rim of the velvet indentation. He withdrew a tiny scrap of mauve silk caught in the wood's grain. Holding it aloft, he studied the frayed edge. "Note the freshness of this tear," he murmured. "The thief must have worked in haste." A ripple of speculation passed through the crowd. "Inspector Morton," Poirot called, turning to the Scotland Yard officer summoned earlier that evening. "Might I have your assistance? A careful reconstruction of the entry point may illuminate the method of removal." The inspector approached, clipboard in hand, already noting the silk and the pattern of the drapery folds. Lady Cecilia Moore, her sapphire necklace catching the lamplight, stepped forward. "The conservatory windows were open when I passed through," she offered. "I saw no sign of forced entry, but the latch was definitely unfastened." "Indeed." Poirot's gaze turned to the tall French windows, their panes gleaming. He rose, walking toward them, examining the sill. There he discovered a smear of mud, subtle but unmistakable against the polished wood. He crouched again, freshly tracked, perhaps from the east terrace, he noted. Miss Daphne Carrington, the host's niece, paled noticeably. "But that terrace faces the rose garden," she protested, voice quivering. "No one should have gone there tonight." "Exactly," Poirot agreed, pocketing the silk scrap with care, which makes this clue all the more intriguing. It suggests premeditation. The thief planned an exit through the garden, expecting cover beneath the moonlit arbor. He stood, addressing the room. "I propose we collect all jackets and wraps. There may be traces of soil or plant matter to confirm movement through the rose garden." Sir Reginald exchanged worried glances with Inspector Morton. Soon, the servants began gathering garments, laying them out for inspection. Poirot turned to the assembled company. "Whilst this is done, allow me to pose a question. Who among you had both motive and opportunity to remove the clock without attracting attention?" No immediate response came. Colonel Ambrose Fielding, his uniform pristine, met Poirot's gaze steadily. "I have served His Majesty faithfully. My interests lie elsewhere." Mr. Lucien Hart, the playwright, sipped his champagne deliberately. "An exquisite piece, yes, but surely not worth risking one's social standing." As the guests murmured, Poirot's mind connected each half-spoken thought. A torn scrap, footprints of dust, an unguarded window, and a circle of suspects, each with concealed motives. He glanced once more at the empty space on the mantel. By tomorrow's first light, the truth would be laid bare, like the hands of a clock, moving inevitably toward revelation. And so, beneath the shimmer of chandeliers and the echo of distant music, the true puzzle began. A vanished clock, a web of secrets, and the singular mind of Hercule Poirot, poised to unravel them all. Chapter 2. The First Clues. The servants' soft footsteps and hushed voices faded as the guests were escorted to the adjacent library, its mahogany shelves lined with leather-bound volumes and the faint scent of old parchment hanging in the air. Poirot remained by the drawing-room doorway, his gaze lingering on the empty mantel where the ornamental clock had stood. He drew a slow breath, steeling himself for the finer work of observation and inference. Inspector Morton closed the drawing-room door behind him and approached Poirot quietly. "The guests have been moved. Lady Carrington insists no one will leave until the clock is found." "Excellent," replied Poirot. "Opportunity and motive are always entwined. Now, my friend, we turn our attention to the scene itself, to those subtler clues that reveal the mind of the culprit." He gestured toward the drawing-room. "Let us return." Inside, the servants had neatly arrayed the guests' wraps and shawls on a velvet chaise, and atop them lay a fine layer of rose-petal debris. Poirot's eyes sharpened. He nodded toward Inspector Morton. "Observe, dust motes and rose fragments have settled here. The thief passed by this chaise, brushing past the table of petals. It confirms movement from the garden side." Morton knelt to examine the petals. "These are fresh, just this evening." "Precisely. And notice how the distribution is heavier on the left side of the chaise," Poirot continued. "The culprit must be left-handed, carrying something in the right arm." He tapped the chaise's carved armrest. "Porter, the servant in charge, bring me the gloves of each lady present." Porter reappeared moments later, holding small trays of gloves. One by one, Poirot inspected them under the lamp's glow, turning each glove inside out to search for soil, petals, or fibres. At the end, he laid them in a neat row on a small side table. Lady Cecilia Moore watched anxiously as Poirot held up a pair of cream-coloured gloves, their fingertips stained with faint traces of earth. He placed them aside. "Mademoiselle Moore, these gloves bear the marks of both rose petals and garden soil. Pray tell me, did you walk through the rose garden this evening?" Her lips pressed together. I stepped out for fresh air before dinner, but only briefly. I did not notice petals, and I had gloves in hand." Poirot nodded thoughtfully, placing her gloves still with the others. Next, he picked up a pair of lavender gloves, each fingertip pristine. He paused, then tapped their smooth surface. "These have no trace of anything, which is curious. If the wearer passed through the rose garden, there should be residue. Who do these belong to?" Miss Daphne Carrington swallowed, her cheeks paling. "They are mine," she admitted. "I left them by the fountain earlier." Poirot inclined his head. "Thank you, mademoiselle. Now, may I have the gloves of Lady Alcott?" When her gloves were produced, Poirot frowned. The delicate lace bore a smear of something dark and glossy. Cognac, it seemed, with the faintest glint of red. He studied the stain. Interesting. He tapped a gloved finger against his lips in contemplation. "Who among us has recently spilled cognac on you, Lady Winifred?" A chorus of denials and shifting glances answered. Lady Alcott's eyebrows knitted. "I don't recall spilling any, but if it is cognac, then perhaps someone brushed past me." "Or you brushed past them," Poirot countered quietly. "Either way, the stain speaks of contact." He laid her gloves aside. Next, he examined the men's gloves. Colonel Fielding's pair smelled faintly of cigar smoke and bore no other marks. Mr. Hart's gloves bore a thin smear of something oily, likely from his pocket watch mechanism. The final pair, small and neatly stitched, was the only pair without any mark at all. Poirot held them up. "And these?" Mr. Lucian Hart leaned forward. "Mine," he said lightly. "I replaced them earlier after misplacing my first pair." "Indeed?" Poirot's eyes glinted. "Then you have had occasion to change gloves tonight." He placed them among the others. The silence that followed was pregnant with implication. Poirot rose from his crouch and addressed the company. "We have already learned much, that the thief traversed the rose garden, left traces of petals and soil, and may have changed or spilled upon their gloves. Combined with our broken window latch, we see a plan executed with some care, and yet imperfectly." Sir Reginald stepped forward. "Monsieur Poirot, you speak of imperfect execution. What do you propose next?" Poirot's moustaches twitched. "We must examine the crime scene in finer detail. I wish to see the windows, the terrace, and the path to the rose arbor. And I would request that no one departs the grounds until I have completed my survey." Inspector Morton inclined his head. "Very well, I will station officers at all exits." Together, Poirot and Morton ascended the wide drawing-room steps to the marble-floored veranda. The glass French windows stood open, their cool air stirring the hem of Poirot's coat. He stepped onto the veranda, inspecting the threshold. There, in the pale moonlight, a small indentation scarred the polished stone. He bent to examine it. Footwear of a narrow sole, perhaps a lady's evening heel. He traced the line with his cane tip. See how the indentation is shallower at the heel and deeper at the toe. The wearer's gait was hurried, leaning forward to flee with something precious. He stood and pointed toward the rose garden beyond. "Let us follow." They stepped onto the grass, soft with dew. Moonlit petals carpeted the ground. Poirot stooped again to recover a single white petal folded in two, as though carried in a glove. He slipped it into a glass vial. "This, too, will tell us much." They approached the arbour, whose iron trellis was woven with jasmine. Here, the path widened, and Poirot noted fresh scuff marks on the stone. "Grass and soil displaced," he murmured. "The thief paused here, likely to secure their load." He turned to Morton. "Have all guests been accounted for since dinner? No one should go unobserved." "Our records show everyone present at the entertainment in the ballroom," Morton replied, "and the servants confirm no unexpected visitors arrived." "Then our circle of suspects tightens," Poirot said. He rose, stretching slightly. "The final clue lies back at the drawing room, the strange note." He produced the folded paper from his waistcoat pocket. "Remember this message. One must hear the ticking to know the heart within." Now, why leave a cryptic riddle? It could be mockery or a signal, but I suspect it points to when the clock's chime would have sounded. He gestured toward the hour. If the thief intended to sell or hide the clock, they would need to know its mechanism. They must have listened to it tick to understand how to remove it without damage. This suggests familiarity with clocks, or at least a deliberate attempt to learn. "Could it be someone in this household?" asked Sir Reginald softly, his gaze on the velvet-draped mantel beyond. "Possibly," Poirot agreed, "or an intimate guest with mechanical interests." He paused, letting the thought settle. "Tonight, then, we have two tracks: the physical, soil, petals, glove marks, and the intellectual, the riddle, the mechanism. We follow both." They retraced their steps to the drawing room. As guests shuffled at the hallway entrance, Poirot gave a final injunction. "I ask each of you to reflect upon your evening. Did you hear the clock's chime? Did you notice its ticking? And if you did, where were you at the moment it struck? We shall convene shortly to compare accounts." Locked in an atmosphere thick with suspense, the guests exchanged uneasy glances. Outside, the roses stirred silently in the moonlight, their petals waiting for an answer no one yet dared to speak aloud. Within the stillness of Carrington Manor, the first clues had been laid bare, trivia and trappings that hinted at deeper truths. Now, in the hush before dawn, the game was truly afoot, and Hercule Poirot, his little grey cells alight, would not rest until every puzzle piece found its place. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. After instructing the guests to reflect on their whereabouts at the hour the clock would have struck, Poirot withdrew to the panelled study adjacent to the library. There, a polished mahogany table stood ready, its surface cleared of books and quills to accommodate the assembly. Sir Reginald Carrington opened the heavy oaken doors and, with a courteous nod from Poirot, invited each guest to take a seat around the table. One by one they entered. Lady Cecilia Moore, her sapphire necklace resting low on her throat, Colonel Ambrose Fielding, his uniform immaculate despite the late hour, Mr. Lucian Hart, who carried himself with the languid ease of a dramatist, Lady Winifred Alcott, her expression composed but guarded, and Miss Daphne Carrington, who lingered at the threshold, her lavender gloves folded neatly in her gloved hands. Inspector Morton remained behind Poirot, ready to record every statement. Poirot rose from his own chair and swept his gaze over the assembled circle. "Mes amis," he began, his voice calm but insistent, "tonight's events compel us to know one another better than before. We are a closed circle. No one has entered or left in these past hours. Therefore, the culprit is among you. Let us share our circumstances at the crucial time, 9 o'clock, when the clock should have chimed." He paused to allow the weight of his words to settle. Lady Cecilia leaned forward. "At 9, I was in the conservatory with Lady Alcott, admiring the late blooms in the moonlight. She turned to Lady Winifred. We spoke of future charitable works for the Carrington estate. Lady Alcott nodded. Indeed. I remember glancing at my wristwatch precisely as it struck 9. No chime reached us. Poirot made a note. Conservatory. Noted. And you, Colonel Fielding? The Colonel's posture remained stiff. I was inspecting the wine cellar to determine what port we might serve later. He gave a slight half-smile. I prefer the darker vintages. Poirot tapped his pencil thoughtfully. Very well. Mr. Hart. The playwright swept a lock of hair from his forehead. I was discussing a theatrical commission with Carrington here, he said, inclining his head toward Sir Reginald. We stood by the grand piano rehearsing dialogue for a historical piece. My attention was on dialogue cadence, not clockwork. Hart's eyes gleamed. I would have noticed a chime, but there was none. Poirot's moustaches quivered. Curious. Lady Winifred? Lady Alcott folded her hands in her lap. I have already said I was in the conservatory. She glanced at Lady Moore. Until precisely 9. She hesitated. I did visit the drawing room afterward to fetch a shawl. A murmur ran through the table. Poirot's eyebrows danced minutely. Thank you. And you, Miss Carrington? Daphne straightened, placing her gloves on the table. I was in the garden, among the rose bushes, until Lady Moore beckoned me inside. I arrived moments before the announcement. She clasped her hands. I heard no chime. I only heard the gasp when Sir Reginald spoke. Poirot nodded, then turned to his own blank page. Now we must consider motive. Each of you has ties to the Carrington family. He pointed first to Lady Moore. You enjoy frequent invitations here. What stirs you to remove a sentimental family heirloom? Cecilia's cheeks flushed. My friendship with Carrington is genuine. There is nothing to be gained. Très bien. Poirot tapped his notes. Colonel Fielding, you served alongside Carrington in India, yet I understand a disagreement over land rights occurred last year. The Colonel's jaw tightened. Professional matters, resolved amicably, but tension, yes. Poirot turned to Mr. Hart. You seek to dramatize the Carrington legacy on stage. Such a clock with its storied provenance would be a prized prop, but also a priceless artifact. Would you risk your reputation for authenticity? Hart's lips curved into a half-smile. Reputation is a fragile thing, monsieur, yet I would not sully mine through theft. Very well. Poirot's gaze shifted to Lady Alcott. You and Sir Reginald share philanthropic interests. Some pests say you stand to gain from certain bequests delayed by his will. Lady Alcott's glance flickered. Rumours, she said coolly. There is no truth. Poirot's eyes softened. Rumours often arise where there is friction. Finally he faced Miss Carrington. You stand to inherit the estate should anything untoward befall your uncle. Daphne's lips trembled. I love my uncle, monsieur. I would not harm him. Poirot folded his hands. Let us now consider opportunity. I ask each of you, did you notice a missing glove, a misplaced handkerchief, or any sign of struggle when you passed by the drawing room? He looked first at Lady Moore. She shook her head. Nothing. Colonel Fielding tapped his fingers on the table. Nor I. Mr. Hart raised an eyebrow. I passed the room only to fetch more cigars. There was nothing out of place. Lady Alcott frowned. I did return briefly. I thought I saw the gloved hands of the person who had taken the clock. She paused, eyes narrowing. But it was too dark to be certain. Daphne inhaled sharply. I saw someone leave the conservatory, but I thought it was a servant. The tension ratcheted higher as Poirot absorbed their statements. He addressed Inspector Morton. Send for the servants on duty. I wish to know who was assigned to the drawing room and conservatory tonight. Their schedules will show precisely who passed, where, and when. As Morton left to fetch the staff roster, Poirot tapped his pencil on the table. In the meantime, I must peer into your personal histories, your secrets, your grudges, and your desires. For motive is born of the heart, not merely of circumstance. He turned back to Lady Moore. Tell me, madame, does anyone here know of your financial concerns? A debt, perhaps, you wish hidden? Cecilia's posture stiffened. I have debts, but no one here could know of them. Ah, said Poirot, tapping his notebook. But someone may suspect. Colonel Fielding, your disagreement over Carrington's land, might it have involved monetary stakes? Fielding's gaze darkened. It was a matter of principle, not profit. Poirot's moustaches quivered in amusement. Principle and profit often walk hand in hand. They fell silent as Morton returned with a tray of servant schedules. He handed each to Poirot in turn. Poirot scanned the pages, then met each guest's eye. The records show that at 9 o'clock only 2 persons passed through the drawing room, Lady Alcott fetching her shawl and Miss Carrington returning indoors. Yet the clock was removed before that. He laid the schedules aside. Thus the theft occurred earlier, when the drawing room seemed empty. He rose and walked slowly to the tall windows. Moonlight painted pale lines on the carpet. So the thief stole the clock, passed through rose petals in haste, changed or stained their gloves and left a riddle behind. Then returned to the house by way of the conservatory. He turned, addressing them all. Which among you retraced your steps twice this evening? A chorus of denials followed. Poirot studied each face as though it were a page. We shall see. Inspector Morton, have the servants summoned. Morton bowed and left once more. As the guests exchanged unsettled glances, Poirot allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. The suspects were arrayed, their alibis voiced, and their motives laid bare in broad strokes. But beneath each statement lay subtle contradictions, waiting to be teased apart by his little grey cells. In the stillness of Belgrave Manor, the circle closed tighter. The web of suspicion had been drawn, but to capture the spider, Poirot would need to catch the smallest tremor in its thread, and that, he knew, would come in the next move. Chapter 4. Poirot arrives. The grandeur of Carrington Manor's entrance hall was matched only by the precision of Hercule Poirot's footsteps as he descended the sweeping staircase. His polished shoes tapped softly upon the marble, punctuating the hush that had settled over the household. In that moment, every servant in livery paused in their duties. Every guest in the adjoining drawing room felt the weight of his presence, and even the portraits lining the walls seemed to incline their painted heads in deference. Poirot reached the foot of the stairs, hands clasped behind his back, moustaches curled to perfection. He paused to survey the assembled company. Lady Cecilia Moore fanning herself with nervous grace, Colonel Ambrose Fielding standing rigid as a statue, Mr. Lucian Hart leaning against a console table, exuding casual confidence, Lady Winifred Alcott smoothing her gown with delicate precision, and Miss Daphne Carrington tucked into a corner, her eyes darting like wary birds. Behind them stood Inspector Morton, clipboard at the ready, and Sir Reginald Carrington, his face a mask of restrained impatience. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began, his voice light yet carrying through the room, I trust you will forgive my interruption of your evening's enjoyment, but the matter of the missing clock demands our immediate attention. I propose we establish certain truths, small facts that, when assembled, will reveal the larger picture. He paused, allowing his gaze to rest on each suspect in turn, as though drawing out their hidden tremors. Despite the ornate surroundings, Poirot appeared utterly at ease, as if the polished marble and velvet drapes were but the stage for his mind's performance. He advanced toward the vacant mantel in the drawing-room. The cluster of guests trailed behind, forming a semicircle around him. Poirot extended a gloved hand and lightly tapped the ornate shelf's edge. "Observe, s'il vous plaît, these minute abrasions on the gilded trim. They correspond exactly to the clock's underside moulding, a perfect fit. Yet these marks are deeper on the right side." He knelt to inspect the dust impressions. This suggests the object was lifted at an angle, the right side rising first. Lady Alcott exchanged a quick glance with Lady Moore, their expressions unreadable. Colonel Fielding's brow furrowed, Hart's eyes glittered with curiosity. Daphne bit her lip. The silence was thick with anticipation. Poirot rose, his posture impeccable. "Now, the official theory holds that the thief escaped through the conservatory window, but I shall demonstrate that this cannot be so." He moved to the French windows, whose panes framed the moonlit gardens. "Note first the height of the sill, nearly 3 feet. A clumsy person might struggle to exit quickly, yet here the sill bears no scratch marks from a hurried descent, only 2 faint smudges, nearly erased, as though someone cleansed them hastily." He lifted one pane gently. Inside, the latch mechanism remains intact. The glass itself shows a minuscule crack, externally applied from without. Yet no similar crack appears on the inner surface. The break was made before the window was locked from within. He turned to the assembled party. Thus, the window must have been broken earlier in the day, perhaps to suggest forced entry, and then locked anew to mislead. Our thief anticipated such suspicion. His eyes flicked to Sir Reginald. "You discovered the fracture during your midday walk through the corridor?" Carrington gave a subtle nod. Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Precisely. The stage was set well before our gathering, yet the crime itself occurred after the fete began. Therefore, the true avenue of egress lay elsewhere." He walked toward the tapestry-draped doorway leading to the library. "Consider this. The door to the library was left ajar when servants carried in refreshments. A discreet exit could have been made there, into the grand hallway, and thence through the servants' corridor, unnoticed by guests." He paused at the threshold. "I shall confirm this theory shortly." Having completed his initial survey, Poirot motioned for Inspector Morton. "I ask you to instruct your officers to seal the servants' corridors and question any staff found there during the evening." Morton inclined his head and departed to carry out the order. Poirot then returned to the center of the drawing-room. He folded his hands behind his back, adopting his most formal stance. "Before we proceed to interrogations, I wish to share my first impressions. These are but hypotheses, subject to correction, yet they may stimulate your own reflections." He turned to Lady Cecilia. "Madame, your hands tremble slightly as you stand here, though your demeanor is composed. This suggests agitation at being observed. You claim to have been in the conservatory with Lady Alcott at the hour of the theft. Yet your gloves bore soil and rose petals, evidence that you passed through the garden alone." He paused to let his words settle. "I therefore propose that you left Lady Alcott's side briefly, removed the clock, and returned, attempting to blend in with her account." Lady Cecilia stiffened, her fan fluttering like a wounded bird. Lady Alcott's eyes widened in surprise. Cecilia forced a smile. "Monsieur Poirot, you are quite perceptive. But I assure you, I did remain by Lady Alcott's side." Mon ami, Poirot said gently, moving on to Colonel Fielding. Your posture is rigid, your gaze fixed. You claim to have been in the wine cellar, yet the cellar door bears no fingerprints beyond the lowest panel, suggesting someone of shorter stature entered, not a tall man in military boots. Your boots, I note, show no sign of dampness, yet the cellar floor was slick with condensation this evening. The Colonel's jaw clenched. Poirot turned to Mr. Lucien Hart. You were at the grand piano rehearsing dialogue, and yet your gloves bore an oily residue consistent with handling metal gears, perhaps a watch. Yet you do not keep a timepiece on your person. Hart's lips curled. I lent my watch to the host to replace one whose chain broke during our rehearsal. A murmur rippled around the room. Indeed, Poirot replied, his eyebrows rising. A charitable act, perfectly natural, unless one intended to handle clocks more intimately. He moved to Lady Alcott. You claimed only to have fetched your shawl, yet the waistband of your gown bears a faint smear of cognac, as though someone brushed past you while carrying a glass, an interaction you do not recall. Lady Alcott's lips pressed into a thin line. Finally, Poirot addressed Miss Daphne Carrington. You speak of hearing nothing, yet you lingered near the drawing-room entrance when the announcement was made. Your gloves, however, bear no trace of soil or petals, unusual for someone who claimed time in the garden. Daphne's cheeks burned as she looked down. Poirot allowed the brief charge to hover before addressing them all. These are merely my first impressions, mental notes to guide our inquiry. I do not accuse, but rather illuminate possibilities. The true task now is methodical questioning, comparing your accounts, and exposing the contradictions that lead us to the culprit. He moved to a small side table and produced a thin notebook. Inspector Morton, he said, when all are assembled, I shall begin the formal interviews. Each of you will have the opportunity to clarify your statements. But bear in mind, the truth lies in the nuances, the slight hesitations, the unspoken tensions, the gestures made in passing. My little grey cells are most alert to these details. With a final sweeping look at the guests, Poirot straightened his cravat and raised a gloved hand. Let us proceed. As Inspector Morton called forward the first suspect for questioning, the atmosphere crackled with renewed tension. The suspects realized that the true investigation had begun, not the surface examination of gloves and footprints, but the surgical probing of their minds and motives. And at the center of it all stood Hercule Poirot, ready to unravel their deceptions, one carefully chosen question at a time. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. The heavy door to the drawing-room study closed with a soft click, leaving Lady Cecilia Moore and Hercule Poirot alone beneath the flickering glow of the gas lamp. Inspector Morton stood discreetly by the door, note-taking. Poirot motioned for Lady Cecilia to be seated in the high-backed armchair, then placed himself opposite, legs crossed, notebook in hand. Madame, Poirot began in his gentle yet incisive tone, you informed us that you and Lady Alcott walked to the conservatory together. Yet your gloves bore soil and rose petals, suggesting you ventured into the garden alone. He leaned forward, fingers steepled. Pray, explain why you might have separated from Lady Alcott before the theft. Lady Cecilia's throat bobbed with uncertainty. I felt unwell, she faltered. The night air was stifling, and I stepped outside alone to steady myself against the terrace railing. I did not intend to return to the garden, only to breathe. Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. Certainly, but the path you took led through the rose arbor. One does not traverse that path without noticing the crush of petals. He tapped his pencil. And you returned wearing the same gloves, though mine bore the traces of your walk. Her hands trembled as she clutched the armrests. I didn't think to change them. I was focused on my discomfort. She paused. I never entered the drawing room again until the announcement. Yet, Poirot persisted, someone must have. Did you glimpse anyone entering or leaving during your brief absence? Cecilia inhaled. I thought I saw a figure, tall, in dark clothing, slip through the doorway toward the servants' corridor. But I dismissed it as a footman. Poirot smiled thinly. An understandable mistake in low light, yet a footman would not pass wearing evening gloves. He closed his notebook. Thank you, madame. You may step outside now. Cecilia rose, pale but composed, and exited. Inspector Morton called forward Colonel Ambrose Fielding. The colonel entered, standing rigid before Poirot. Colonel, Poirot said, you claim to be in the wine cellar at 9 o'clock. Yet the cellar door bears only low-panel fingerprints, unlikely for a tall man. Additionally, your boots were dry, contrary to the cellar's damp floor. Fielding's jaw tightened. I examined the wine racks from the hallway. I did not enter the cellar fully. Poirot raised an eyebrow. Then how do you account for the footprints within, he tapped a page, immediately outside the cellar door? The colonel's composure flickered. I may have paused there, leaning against the jamb. Precisely. Poirot's moustaches twitched. To overhear conversation, perhaps, or to create an alibi. He leaned back. Did you see anyone else near that door? Fielding met Poirot's gaze. Only Inspector Morton, arriving to secure the premises. Very well. Poirot closed his notebook. Your statement has been noted. Fielding bowed slightly and left. Next was Mr. Lucien Hart, who strolled in with theatrical flair. He paused to fold his gloves on the side table before taking the offered seat. Monsieur Hart, Poirot began, you lent your pocket watch to Sir Reginald after your rehearsal. Your gloves bore oily residue consistent with winding mechanisms. Yet you maintained you stood at the piano. Hart's smile was sardonic. I'm a dramatist, not a horologist. I may have checked the clock's timing out of curiosity. Poirot tapped his pencil. Curiosity can lead one to investigate the lockwork, especially if one is to remove such a mechanism intact. He watched Hart's reaction. Did you handle the mantel clock before its removal? Hart's eyes flickered. I admired it, from a distance. And yet you admit handling Lady Carrington's. Watch mechanism. Do you understand the precision required to extract clockwork without damage? The playwright's composure faltered for a heartbeat. I suppose one requires skill. Poirot smiled faintly. Indeed. Thank you, monsieur. You may return to the hallway. Hart rose with a bow and departed. Lady Winifred Alcott entered next, her posture composed, though her cheeks were flushed. Lady Alcott, Poirot said softly. Your gloves bore a cognac stain, implying contact with someone carrying a drink. You claimed to fetch your shawl, yet you do not recall brushing past anyone. She lifted her chin. I merely passed the refreshment table. Perhaps I knocked a glass. True, but the stain is on the inner wrist, an area unlikely to brush the table. Rather, it suggests someone carrying cognac touched you. Poirot paused. Who was nearest to you at that moment? Lady Alcott hesitated. I believe Colonel Fielding offered me a glass, though I declined. Poirot's eyes brightened. So you recall him being close, yet his gloves bear no such stain. He leaned in. Perhaps you brushed past the thief, who carried a glass to mask the sound of the clock's removal. Her fingers curled around the armrests. I did feel a brush at my side, but I thought it accidental. "Understandable," Poirot said. "Thank you, Lady Alcott." She rose and left the study. Finally, Miss Daphne Carrington entered, looking anxious but determined. She seated herself, unfolding her lavender gloves and setting them aside. "Mademoiselle," Poirot began kindly, "you claim to have stepped from the garden into the conservatory, yet your gloves bear no trace of petals or soil. How do you explain this?" Daphne's gaze dropped. I changed my gloves in the conservatory." Poirot's eyebrows arched. "Changed them? Then you carried with you your first pair, and its debris. Where are they now?" Her lips quivered. "I thought I dropped them near the fountain, but I cannot recall exactly." The detective's smile was subtle. "Which fountain? The East Terrace or the West Lawn? And did you inform anyone of this change?" She shook her head. "No, I was flustered by the announcement." Poirot closed his notebook. "Very well. I ask that you search for your missing gloves and present them to Inspector Morton." As Daphne stood, the door opened and Inspector Morton ushered in Sir Reginald Carrington himself. Poirot motioned for the host to be seated in the final chair. "Sir Reginald," Poirot said, "you discovered the broken window earlier today and staged it to appear forced, yet you maintain it was merely an act of precaution." Carrington's eyes were weary. "I wished to dissuade curious onlookers before tonight's event." "Perhaps," Poirot conceded, "but the crack's placement suggests someone dislodged the lock deliberately. Was it you or another?" The baronet frowned. "I swear I discovered it. I did not break it." Poirot studied him for a moment, then closed his notebook. "Thank you, Sir Reginald. That will be all for now." As the final interview concluded, Poirot rose and addressed Inspector Morton. "We have gathered valuable insights, conflicting accounts, concealed movements, and misplaced gloves, yet the heart of the matter remains hidden. We must now compare these testimonies to the physical evidence, glove marks, soil, and the note. Only then will our path forward become clear." Morton nodded and began assembling the statements. Outside the study, the guests exchanged uneasy glances. Within, Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells ablaze, prepared to weave together the threads of deceit. The game had moved beyond observation and into the realm of motive and mind, and no secret, he knew, would remain concealed for long. Chapter 6. The First False Lead. The grand hallway outside the study was dimly lit by wall sconces, their flickering flames casting shifting shadows on the oil portraits lining the walls. Inspector Morton had assembled the gloves, soil samples, and the slip of paper, with the cryptic note on a side table beneath a single lamp. Poirot moved among the evidence, his gaze thoughtful, moustaches twitching in concentration. "Inspector," Poirot said softly, "let us review the evidence once more before we consider the testimonies." He picked up a pair of cream-coloured gloves, the ones stained with soil and rose-petal fragments. "These belong to Lady Cecilia Moore. She admits to passing through the garden, yet claims her motive was only fresh air and composure. The stain on Lady Alcott's gloves suggests a fleeting contact, while Colonel Fielding's gloves bear no mark at all. And our playwright, Monsieur Hart, replaced his gloves entirely this evening, as did Miss Carrington." He set each pair in a neat row, then picked up the folded note. "Finally the message. One must hear the ticking to know the heart within. All these clues point in contradictory directions, but one suspect seems most implicated: Cecilia, for her soil and petals." Morton frowned. "You believe she is our primary suspect?" Poirot folded the note and replaced it on the table. At first glance, yes, but evidence that appears damning may be intended to mislead. We must exercise caution before accusing. I propose we follow a false lead to draw out the true culprit's reaction. Morton raised an eyebrow. And how do you suggest we do that? Poirot smiled faintly. We plant the idea that Lady Moore will be subjected to stricter scrutiny. If another suspect fears her innocence might expose them, they may act rashly. He flicked his wrist toward the study door. Let us proceed to the drawing room. They left the evidence behind and re-entered the room where all the guests had reconvened. The suspects stood in small clusters, exchanging uneasy glances. Lady Moore sat at a side table, hands folded in her lap, glancing toward the study door as if expecting Poirot to emerge and summon her. Poirot cleared his throat. "Dear friends," he announced, projecting calm authority. "In light of new considerations, we shall delay further interviews until we can examine additional evidence. In particular, indications suggest contamination of certain gloves. Lady Moore's gloves, for instance, bore soil and rose petals, direct evidence of traversing the garden at an inopportune time." A murmur rippled through the room. Lady Moore's hand tightened on the table. Colonel Fielding stepped forward. "Surely you do not intend to accuse her without further inquiry?" "In due course, yes," Poirot replied smoothly. "But for now, Inspector Morton and I must perform tests on those gloves. I ask that no one touch them." He turned to Lady Moore. "Madam, I regret that this requires a temporary separation. Will you accompany Inspector Morton to my temporary laboratory adjacent to the billiard room?" Cecilia rose, face paling, and allowed Morton to guide her away. The rest of the guests watched her retreating figure with varied expressions, some concerned, others subtly relieved. Once Lady Moore was out of sight, Poirot addressed the remaining party. "The windows and corridors are sealed. No one may leave or enter. I ask for your continued patience. Your anxieties will soon be soothed by clarity." He paused, letting his words settle like a weight. "In the meantime, I invite anyone who has further observations to share them now." No one moved. The hush was heavy. Poirot's keen eyes flicked from face to face. Finally, Mr. Lucien Hart cleared his throat. "Monsieur Poirot, if Lady Moore is under suspicion, might we revisit our alibis? Perhaps we overlooked something." "That is precisely my intention," Poirot said. "We shall proceed with interviews again shortly. But first, let us consider the possible motive for framing Lady Moore. Who among you would benefit from redirecting suspicion away from themselves onto her?" He paused, letting that speculation hang in the air. Lady Winifred Alcott shifted uneasily. Colonel Fielding's jaw clenched. Miss Carrington bit her lip. Hart's eyes glittered with faint excitement. Poirot noted each reaction with the precision of a surgeon regarding subtle tremors. Moments later, Inspector Morton returned with Lady Moore beside him. She looked composed, though her cheeks were tinged with color. Morton carried a small paper bag. "Monsieur Poirot, we have dusted the gloves for further soil analysis. The results will be ready shortly." "Thank you, Inspector," Poirot replied. He swept his gaze over Lady Moore. "Madame, you may rejoin the group, but please remain available until our inquiry resumes." Cecilia offered a stiff nod and moved to stand among the guests, who parted slightly to admit her. Poirot returned to the side table and retrieved the note. Without fanfare, he unfolded it and read aloud, "One must hear the ticking to know the heart within." A riddle, perhaps, but also possibly an admission by the thief. They listened to the clock's mechanism to understand how to remove it intact. He paused. If so, the thief is someone knowledgeable of clockwork, or someone who studied our clock before tonight. Colonel Fielding took a step forward. I have some knowledge of mechanics, enough to maintain a reliable timepiece. Poirot considered him. A military man often trusts his watch. However, your gloves bore no oil residue. The colonel's face betrayed a flash of relief. Poirot continued, which suggests a different suspect, someone who displayed oily smudges on their gloves, Monsieur Hart. He turned to the playwright. You admit to handling mechanisms, yet you deny removing the clock. Hart inclined his head. I admire the device, yes, but admiration is not theft. True, Poirot conceded. Admiration need not lead to larceny. But framing another to divert attention requires cunning and a flair for drama. He let the implication linger. Hart's composure flickered, only for a moment. Poirot then addressed Lady Alcott. Your cognac stain suggests contact with someone bearing a glass. If the thief held a drink to cloak the sound of moving the clock, it could not be carried by Colonel Fielding, whose gloves were clean, and Lady Moore's gloves were occupied elsewhere. He looked at Miss Carrington. Which leaves only you and Mr. Hart. Lady Alcott's lips pressed into a thin line. You insinuate that I am the culprit. Not yet, Poirot replied. Merely that the evidence as it stands points most strongly in that direction, unless someone seeks to mislead us by insinuating guilt onto another. He paced slowly among the guests. In such a game of shadows, the first false lead often reveals the true path. If Lady Moore were truly guilty, she would not be merely discomfited. She would resist fiercely. Cecilia's face was calm, but her hands trembled. Fielding's expression remained stone. Hart's eyes, however, darted away as if unable to meet Poirot's gaze. Lady Alcott's breathing was shallow. Miss Carrington's lips quivered. Poirot stopped near the fireplace and folded his arms. We shall soon know whether I have led ourselves astray, or whether our culprit remains among you, disturbed by the thought that their deception may unravel. He turned to Inspector Morton. Advise me when the glove analysis is complete. Morton inclined his head and withdrew to the study. Poirot allowed a moment of silence to settle before addressing the group. I thank you for your patience. Nothing will proceed until each of you has reflected deeply upon your circumstances. If you recall any overlooked detail, an overheard phrase, a misplaced object, speak freely. The smallest clue may shatter the strongest alibi. As the guests exchanged apprehensive glances, Poirot turned back to the empty mantel where the stolen clock should have stood. He placed a gloved hand upon the shelf's edge. Mon ami, he murmured to the silent room, the first false lead is set. Now let us await the reaction it provokes. Outside, roses stirred in the night breeze, their perfume drifting through the open windows, an unseen witness to the drama unfolding within Carrington Manor. And within, Hercule Poirot's little grey cells worked tirelessly, poised to discern truth from artifice in the game of mind and motive. Chapter 7. The Psychological Game. The flickering lamplight in the drawing-room cast dancing shadows on the walls as the guests gathered once more around the central hearth. The atmosphere was taut, each face drawn and wary. Poirot stood by the mantel, still empty except for the faint dust outline of the stolen clock. His posture relaxed, but every muscle alert. He surveyed the assembly with keen eyes, ready to provoke the reactions that would lay bare hidden truths. Mes amis, he began, his voice low yet carrying throughout the room. We have observed physical evidence and questioned your alibis. Now, I propose we engage in a more delicate exercise, a psychological game. He allowed a slight smile to play on his lips. A series of questions, designed to unmask contradictions and to see who trembles under the light of scrutiny. His gaze settled on Lady Cecilia Moore first. Madame, you have felt the weight of suspicion upon you. Tell us, what did you feel when you learned the clock was missing? Her eyes flickered, and she pressed her pursed lips together. Shock and betrayal. I thought it impossible for anyone in this circle to commit such an act. Poirot inclined his head. Yet you traversed the rose garden alone, shedding petals upon your gloves. Do you still maintain your sole motive was fresh air? Cecilia's hand trembled around her fan. Yes, that is all. He turned to Colonel Fielding. Colonel, you claim to linger outside the wine cellar. Tell me, what did you hope to overhear? Fielding's jaw tensed. Nothing, only curiosity about the night's provisions. Curiosity, Poirot repeated. Yet such curiosity led you to pause in a place where no gentleman need linger. He paused, letting the point hang. The Colonel's rigid posture wavered for an instant. Poirot next faced Mr. Lucien Hart. Monsieur, your dramatic instincts are keen. You replaced your gloves before our inquiry. Tell me, did you fear your original gloves bore some revelation? Hart's lips curved in a rueful half-smile. I anticipated questions and preferred a clean appearance. A wise precaution, Poirot agreed. Yet honesty shines brighter than spotless gloves. He clicked his tongue softly. Lady Winifred Alcott's eyes darted as Poirot addressed her. Lady Alcott, you fetched your shawl, but the cognac stain on your gloves suggests a close encounter. Who brushed past you? She inhaled sharply. I do not know. I merely felt a warm brush at my side. An accidental brush. Poirot's tone was gentle, but his gaze pierced. Or a deliberate one, to mask the sound of removal. Lady Alcott's knuckles whitened on her lap. Finally, Poirot turned to Miss Daphne Carrington. Mademoiselle, you changed your gloves in the conservatory, yet cannot recall where you left the first pair. Why the change? Daphne's cheeks burned. I was unsettled by the announcement. I did not wish to soil my gloves further. A prudent woman, Poirot acknowledged. Yet the debris from your first gloves remains unexamined, hidden from us. He raised an eyebrow. Having briefly surveyed them all, Poirot raised his hands in invitation. Now, a simple question for everyone. At precisely 9 o'clock, when the clock would have chimed, what was the exact sound you heard? The guests exchanged glances. Lady Moore spoke first. Silence, only the distant murmur of conversation. Colonel Fielding added, I heard footsteps on the terrace, then nothing. Hart said, I was near the piano, no chime, but I recall a faint clatter as though metal struck wood. Lady Alcott hesitated. I heard a muted click, not a chime. Daphne offered, I heard voices rising, laughter, no clock. Poirot's little grey cells hummed. Interesting, he murmured. All but one suspect heard an anomalous sound. Only Lady Alcott heard a click. His gaze shifted to her. A mechanism disengaging, perhaps, rather than a spring-driven chime. Lady Alcott's breath caught. Poirot held up a slender hand. But let us refine the game. I wish each of you to recount precisely where you were standing, which direction you faced, and whether you closed your eyes, even briefly, at the moment you heard this sound. One by one, each described the exact orientation of feet, tilt of head, and focus of eyes. Poirot listened intently, making tiny notations. When it was Lady Alcott's turn, her voice quivered. I faced the refreshment table, tuning out the music, my eyes shut for a moment as I gathered my shawl. Eyes shut, Poirot repeated softly. Yet your gloves bear the cognac stain on the inner wrist, an area unseen if one's eyes are closed. He paused, curious. The assembled guests shifted, awareness dawning that each nuance mattered. Poirot then smiled and raised his finger, indicating a final question. Who among you chose deliberately to mute the chime so that no one would suspect removal by sound? Silence followed, taut as a drawn bowstring. Then Mr. Hart cleared his throat. I admired the clock's face and wondered how it would sound, but I would not silence it. Nor would Colonel Fielding? Poirot queried. I had no interest in clockwork, the Colonel replied, though his tone lacked conviction. Lady Moore shook her head. I enjoyed its chime, would not silence it. Daphne glanced down. I did not hear it at all. All eyes fell on Lady Alcott. Her lips parted. I moved the clock when I heard music crescendo, fearing it would mask the sound. I pressed my finger against the mechanism to still it. A collective gasp filled the room. Poirot's moustaches curled in satisfaction. Madame Alcott, you admit silencing the clock. You and I both heard no chime, for you prevented it. This act alone places you at the mechanism. He stepped closer. Yet you did not intend theft. You intended to conceal its removal until you had time to complete your plan. Tears welled in her eyes. It was not meant to be stolen for sale. I only wished to protect certain documents hidden within. I thought to remove them discreetly, then return the clock. Poirot inclined his head. A secondary mystery indeed. But we shall explore that in due time. He turned to the others. You see how the psychological game works. By asking not what you did, but what you felt and perceived, we uncover the hidden truth. He faced Lady Alcott. You will accompany me to restore the documents and to explain the deeper motive behind your actions. As she rose, defeated yet relieved, the other guests exhaled collectively. The circle of suspicion narrowed once more, but in doing so, Poirot had uncovered a new facet of the crime, a crime not of simple theft, but of secret preservation. And in the quiet aftermath, his little grey cells already churned toward the next move, for the tangled mind games of Carrington Manor had only grown more intricate. Chapter 8. A Secondary Mystery. The confession of Lady Winifred Alcott reverberated through the drawing-room like a distant tolling bell, though the clock itself remained conspicuously absent. Her tearful admission that she had silenced the mechanism to remove documents hidden within unveiled a new layer to the unfolding drama. But as Poirot guided her from the circle of guests toward the panelled study, an undercurrent of unease rippled through the company. For in revealing one secret, another had surely been set in motion. Once Lady Alcott and Poirot had disappeared behind the closed doors, Colonel Fielding exchanged a wary glance with Mr. Lucien Hart. Daphne Carrington pressed her lavender gloves to her heart as Sir Reginald Carrington's jaw clenched. Inspector Morton stepped forward to address the assembled. Monsieur Poirot and Lady Alcott will be some time. Let us remain here until they return. But minutes stretched into a tense vigil. The soft murmur of servants in the corridor could not dispel the charged silence. Then, sharp, unexpected, a muffled crash emanated from the billiard room beyond the study. It was followed by a strangled cry, "Monsieur Poirot!" Gasps filled the room as guests surged toward the study doors. Inspector Morton flung them open. Inside, the billiard room lay in disarray. A green baize table was overturned, its balls strewn like pearls across the wooden floor. At the far end, Poirot knelt beside Lady Alcott, who lay on the carpeted floor, her face pale, one hand pressed to her neck. A small crystal decanter, its contents spilled, glinted near her elbow. "Clear the way," Poirot commanded, supporting Lady Alcott's head. The guests recoiled as Colonel Fielding rushed forward to help. "She has been poisoned," Poirot announced, voice steady but urgent. The decanter contained a strong aniseed liqueur, mixed with a potent neurotoxin. I recognize its faint metallic undertone. Sir Reginald knelt beside his guest of honor. "Winifred, speak to me," he urged. Lady Alcott's eyelids fluttered and she attempted a whisper. He... Poirot turned to Morton. "Find the empty glass. Seal the room. No one may leave." The inspector barked orders to the butler, who hurried to secure the windows and doors. Meanwhile, Poirot pressed a handkerchief dampened with eau de cologne to Lady Alcott's lips, guiding her through breathing exercises. As Cecil slipped in and out of consciousness, Poirot stroked his chin. "We now have a second crime. An attempt to silence Lady Alcott forever. The question is, who benefits from her demise?" He rose, turning to the stunned guests. "Stand back, s'il vous plaît. Give her air." Daphne Carrington blew softly on Lady Alcott's face. "She's breathing," she whispered. Colonel Fielding checked the pulse at her wrist. "Strong, but rapid." Poirot nodded. "Good. Now, let us piece together what occurred here." He surveyed the overturned billiard table. The struggle was brief but fierce. Notice the scratch on the left rail, indicating she fought with her right hand. Yet there is no wound on that hand, suggesting a dart or poisoned tip struck her neck. He pointed to a small puncture near her collarbone. A fine needle. It was prepared in advance. This was a deliberate attempt on her life. Sir Reginald, eyes wide, looked around the room. But who would do such a thing? We are all loyal to her. Poirot's gaze flicked to each face. We must consider motive anew. Lady Alcott's removal of documents from the clock indicates she discovered something in Sir Reginald's study, something worth concealing. The poisoner likely aimed to prevent her from revealing those contents. He paced slowly, which suggests the culprit is intimately connected to both the clock and the documents. Mr. Hart swallowed. Documents? We know nothing of these papers. Poirot turned to him. Precisely, but Lady Alcott did, and she paid for that knowledge. He motioned to Daphne. Mademoiselle Carrington, you brought Lady Alcott here to retrieve her shawl, yet the documents lay hidden within the clock's casing. Did you observe her leaving with any papers? Daphne's brow furrowed. No, I only saw her slip behind the mantel during the commotion of the false lead. Indeed. Poirot nodded. She was alone with the clock for a moment. Then you returned, finding her gone and cloth scraps scattered. He pointed to a torn corner of the velvet drapery now lying on the floor. That scrap matches the binding of a ledger, a family ledger perhaps, or a will. Sir Reginald stepped forward, voice taut. My late brother's will was supposed to be here, in this very clock casing, but it disappeared years ago. I presumed it lost. His hands trembled. Lady Alcott discovered it and sought to return it, or to safeguard it. Poirot's moustaches quivered. So the documents were indeed a will, one that changes the inheritance of the Carrington estate. He turned to Colonel Fielding. Colonel, you had every opportunity to learn of this. As a close friend and former colleague, you would have known of any family secrets. Fielding's face paled. I had no such knowledge. Naturally, Poirot said, yet if you feared the will would disinherit you of any bequest, you might seek to destroy it or to silence the messenger. The Colonel's eyes narrowed. You slander me, monsieur. Poirot swept his gaze to Mr. Hart. And you, monsieur, with your flair for drama, might relish the chance to rewrite the Carrington legacy in a theatrical flourish. Hart's jaw tightened. I am no forger. Poirot turned to Daphne. Or you, dear niece, who would see your uncle's fortune preserved for you, despite the will's terms. Daphne bit her lip. I would never harm either of you. Poirot held up a slender finger. All remain suspects in this secondary mystery. He walked towards Sir Reginald. We must secure the will, if found, and protect Lady Alcott. He signalled to Morton. Arrange for a physician, and send word that all passageways remain sealed. As Colonel Fielding and Mr. Hart moved to assist Lady Alcott, Poirot resumed his place by the billiard table. He studied the scattered balls and the overturned cues. The poison was applied to the decanter's mouth or the glass's rim. The intended victim drank unknowingly. A subtle touch, a nuance of betrayal. He plucked a billiard ball from the floor. This bone-white sphere, once a chic accessory to tranquil pursuits, now bears witness to violence. Sir Reginald watched Poirot with grim admiration. What do we do now? Poirot placed the ball back gently. We search for the will. It lies hidden where the clock once stood, or wherever the thief attempted to conceal it. Meanwhile, we identify who sought to kill Lady Alcott. The two mysteries intertwine, the missing clock and the missing will. He turned to the assembled guests. Return to your rooms, but remain available. No one sleeps until this matter is resolved. As the guests moved toward the doors, dread and determination etched on their faces, Poirot paused and spoke softly to Sir Reginald. Mon ami, the heart of the mystery beats within these papers. We must find them before the night ends. Outside, the moon traced pale paths across the gardens, oblivious to the darker deeds within Carrington Manor. And within, Poirot's little grey cells burned brighter than ever, determined to disentangle the dual crimes of theft and attempted murder, and to unveil the deeper secret concealed by the ornamental clock. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. The corridors of Carrington Manor felt cavernous in the aftermath of the billiard-room turmoil. Servants had begun draping screens before Lady Alcott's quarters, while physicians bent over her pale form. Yet within the grand salon, Hercule Poirot remained calm, gathering the remaining guests around the long mahogany table once more. The evidence lay before him, the torn ledger binding, the overturned billiard table, and the faint puncture in Lady Alcott's neck. Now it was time to probe deeper, to uncover hidden connections among the suspects that might illuminate both theft and attempted murder. Poirot placed his hands on the table's edge and swept his gaze across the assembled circle. Colonel Ambrose Fielding, Mr. Lucien Hart, Miss Daphne Carrington, and Sir Reginald Carrington himself. Mes amis, he began, we have observed the physical and the psychological. We have seen the interplay of motives, inheritance, secrecy, and retribution. Yet the richest clues often lie in relationships unseen, those connections that bind suspect to victim, culprit to consequence. I propose we examine your interactions with one another to reveal alliances and enmities hidden beneath polite civility. He turned first to Colonel Fielding. Colonel, you and Sir Reginald share a history dating back to India, where you served together in the same regiment. Yet it is said that a dispute over land rights arose between you, rights that Sir Reginald eventually renounced. Pray, recount the nature of this disagreement. Fielding's posture stiffened. We quarrelled over the Bastion estate, which our regiment used as a hospital during the campaign. Sir Reginald claimed ownership thereafter, against my counsel to preserve it for communal use. I protested, but in the end he refused to reconsider. He paused. Our disagreement was spirited, but not bitter. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Curious, for you seem to harbour lingering resentment, and yet you risk little by maintaining it in private. He made a small note. And you, Mr. Hart, he addressed the playwright, you have collaborated with Sir Reginald on several dramatizations of local history. Yet I hear your latest commission was withdrawn unexpectedly. Can you explain this? Hart cleared his throat. Indeed. Sir Reginald initially endorsed my dramatization of the manor's founding, only to withdraw support when I insisted on including an incident concerning the Carrington family's embezzlement scandal. He claimed it was trivial, but I suspect he feared public embarrassment. He shrugged. Our professional relationship soured, but I bear no personal grudge. Nous verrons, Poirot murmured, pen hovering. And you, Miss Carrington, he continued, turning to Daphne. Your relationship with Lady Alcott appears cordial, yet you once mentioned to a servant a desire to discuss family secrets with her in private. Can you elaborate? Daphne's eyes widened. I sought advice on a matter of inheritance, my uncle's generosity versus a clause in his will. I hoped Lady Alcott might guide me. But she seemed distracted. She bit her lip. Our conversation lasted only a few minutes. Poirot's gaze was steady. It seemed longer to Lady Alcott, who, according to medical testimony, believed the documents she recovered concerned the will itself. This suggests she and you spoke not of general matters, but of that very clause. He paused. And you, Sir Reginald, referred to Lady Alcott as your confidant. Yet she betrayed that trust by removing documents from your private study. What led you to confide in her? Sir Reginald cleared his throat, running a hand through his hair. Winifred and I have long shared philanthropic goals. I believed her discretion beyond reproach, until tonight. He pressed his lips. She found the old will among my papers, and intended to protect it from misplacement. That I understand, but why poison her? A hush fell. Poirot nodded slowly. Precisely. There must be another force at work, someone who feared the contents of that will more than its preservation. He turned back to Fielding. Colonel, did you know of Lady Alcott's role as custodian of your late sister's charitable fund? There were rumours you sought to redirect those funds. Fielding's eyes darkened. Yes, I wish to establish a memorial scholarship in my sister's name, rather than see the money dispersed broadly. Lady Alcott refused. He glared at Poirot. I would never resort to poisoning. Poirot's eyes flicked to Hart. Monsieur, you have ties to philanthropic causes too, yet your theatre troupe awaits funding from that same charitable fund. Without Lady Alcott's endorsement, the grant cannot be released. Hart's shoulders tensed. True, he admitted, but I would not risk murder. Poirot nodded. Nevertheless, both of you had cause to resent Lady Alcott's guardianship, and you, Mademoiselle Carrington, stood to benefit from a reversion of funds to the family estate if she were removed. Daphne's lips parted. I would not harm her. Poirot placed his pen on the table. We see a triangle of financial entanglement. Colonel Fielding desiring a scholarship, Monsieur Hart awaiting theatrical funding, and Miss Carrington seeking family control, all bound by Lady Alcott's authority. Yet another connection exists between two suspects. Mr. Hart and Colonel Fielding. He turned to both. You served together on the charity committee for the orphans' home, often clashing over budget allocations. Is that correct? Hart's expression flickered, and Fielding nodded reluctantly. We did disagree, admitted Hart. His refusal to allocate funds for our outreach performances angered me. And yet, Poirot continued, you two have since dined together frequently, sharing private jokes over brandy. A reconciliation, true or convenient? Both men exchanged a glance before Fielding said, We found common ground in other projects. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Indeed, in other projects, such as those approved by Lady Alcott, which suggests you made peace for one reason, to preserve your access to her. But tonight, that access was cut short. He turned to Sir Reginald. And you, who boast of hosting grand events for charity, found your philanthropic plans jeopardized by Lady Alcott's discovery of the will. The baronet's face paled. My plans, but also my reputation. Poirot nodded gravely. Your estate's legacy is at stake, and the will may alter that legacy irrevocably. He paused to let the implication settle. Now, there is one more connection, between Lady Moore and Mr. Hart. It seems you share an acquaintance in the French theatre world. Is that so, Lady Moore? Lady Cecilia Moore, seated quietly until now, inclined her head. I met Mr. Hart at a production in Paris last season. He attended my charitable soirée in the Marais. She shot Hart a glance. We discussed organizing a benefit performance. And did you exchange letters thereafter? Poirot asked. Lady Moore flushed. Yes, occasionally. A correspondence that might include references to funds, performances, and, potentially, the will if you believed it affected your joint venture. He turned to Hart. Monsieur, did you solicit Lady Moore's influence to gain access to the will's provisions? Hart's gaze dropped. I asked for her assistance in raising funds, but not regarding the will. Poirot's nod was slow, yet Lady Moore's gloves bore the soil of the rose garden, and her distress fit the profile of someone both anxious and determined. Perhaps she alone among you had reason to frame another to divert attention. He tapped the ledger scrap on the table. This ledger binding suggests the will was hidden inside the clock casing. When Lady Alcott retrieved it, she had every intention to reveal its contents. Someone here believed that revelation devastating. He looked at each suspect in turn. We have motives rooted in finance and reputation, and alliances that momentarily concealed competition. We have a triangle of beneficiaries, a duo of reconciled rivals, and a patron in the wings seeking leverage. In short, the web is intricate indeed. Poirot rose and folded his hands. Now, I ask each of you to consider, who among you has a relationship with the others so interwoven that betrayal would seem the only recourse? For hidden connections are not merely past allegiances, but the very bonds that can drive one to desperation. He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the lamplit salon. Outside, the wind rustled the roses again, as though echoing the unspoken truths within Carrington Manor. And within, Poirot's little grey cells darted through the newly illuminated network of ties, preparing, at last, to discern the pattern that would reveal the culprit. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret clue. The morning sun slanted through the tall windows of the Carrington Manor library, illuminating the dust motes that danced in its golden rays. The storm of the previous night had passed, leaving only the distant rumble of thunder and a tension that lingered like a stubborn mist. Hercule Poirot stood before the grand oak desk, the recovered will, bound in cracked leather, spread open before him. Around him, the key suspects assembled in silent anticipation: Colonel Fielding, Mr. Lucian Hart, Miss Daphne Carrington, and Sir Reginald Carrington himself. Inspector Morton observed from the door, quill at the ready. Poirot lifted a delicate finger. Mes amis, last night's revelations brought to light the theft of the ornamental clock, the discovery of my host's lost will, and the attempt on Lady Alcott's life. Yet one clue, so small as to have escaped notice, now emerges as the linchpin of the entire affair. He lowered his gaze to the desk, then turned to Sir Reginald. "Allow me, s'il vous plaît." Sir Reginald nodded and handed Poirot the scrap of mauve silk previously retrieved from the mantel. Poirot held it between thumb and forefinger, examining the frayed edge. "This fragment," he began, "torn from the thief's garment, guided my suspicions toward Lady Moore at first. Yet the precise weave of this silk matches not the fabric of her gown, but the lining of another." He closed his eyes briefly, envisioning the scene. "Only one person here wears a gown fully lined with this shade, Miss Carrington." Daphne's breath caught. Poirot continued, "But more than that, note the slight stain upon the edge, a faint, tart trace of aniseed. Not the rose petals or soil we expected, but the very scent of the liqueur used to poison Lady Alcott." He held the silk to his nose and inhaled. The poisoner carried both clock and needle through the conservatory, their garment brushing the drapery, and, in doing so, they transferred this fragment. He turned to Miss Carrington. "You changed your gloves in the conservatory, yes, but did you also brush against the curtain in haste, dropping this fragment?" Daphne's eyes filled with tears as she shook her head. I changed my gloves, but I did not take the clock." Poirot stepped back and addressed the company. Perhaps then the true culprit sought to frame the innocent by planting this evidence. He placed the silk on the desk and reached for the ledger scrap. "Let us examine the will itself." He ran a fingertip across its brittle pages. "Your late uncle decreed that, should he pass without an heir of his choosing, the estate would transfer to a distant charitable trust. Yet a handwritten codicil, signed only by Lady Alcott, amends this, reinstating Miss Carrington as sole beneficiary." Sir Reginald's face paled. Poirot looked at Lady Cecilia Moore. "Lady Moore, you corresponded with Monsieur Hart regarding benefit, performances. Had you known that the original will barred such extravagances, you might have conspired to replace the codicil, to preserve the charitable fund's integrity." Cecilia's lips parted, but her silence spoke volumes. The detective's gaze settled on Colonel Fielding. "Colonel, you desire the scholarship in your sister's memory, yet the codicil diverts funds away from the trust. Were you willing to remove Lady Alcott to restore the fund's original purpose?" Fielding's gaze hardened. "I would not kill for it." Poirot's eyes flicked to Mr. Hart. "Monsieur, your troop's future hinged on that fund. The original will prohibited theatrical grants, yet the codicil permits them under Lady Alcott's stewardship. Would you risk murder to ensure its preservation?" Hart ran a hand through his hair. "No, but I admit I envied her power." Poirot rose and turned back to Daphne. "Now, mademoiselle, you stood to gain under the codicil, yet your innocence is not guaranteed by that fact alone. You found the will last night, yes, but you did not craft the codicil." He paused, letting the room hold its collective breath. "The handwriting on this amendment is not Lady Alcott's, it is another's imitation." He tapped the page. "Who here possesses the skill to forge such a signature?" All eyes shifted uneasily. Sir Reginald spoke, voice trembling. I would never manipulate my niece's interests. Poirot's gaze bore into Cecilia. Lady Moore, you had motive to craft the codicil, preserving funds for the orphanage rather than personal gain. You visited the drawing room earlier, ostensibly to admire the clock, but in truth to recover this very document. Cecilia swallowed hard. I did alter the will, but only to reverse the codicil which I believed Lady Alcott intended to use improperly. Reversal? Poirot arched an eyebrow. Yet the amendment we hold is a restoration of the codicil, not its removal. He turned to Colonel Fielding. You too entered the drawing room under cover of darkness, claiming to inspect the window, and took the clock to find the missing will. Yet you neither had the skill nor the subtlety to safely handle clockwork. Fielding's face reddened with anger. All of you searched the clock, Poirot said, turning to Hart, but only someone familiar with both its mechanism and the family papers would know where the codicil was hidden, and how to silence the clock to avoid drawing attention. He paused. That person was Monsieur Hart. Hart's brow furrowed. I denied this, monsieur, Hart protested, but I admit I studied the clock's workings for my play, imagining a scene where its mechanism concealed secret letters. He looked at Poirot, defiant. I did not poison Lady Alcott or write the codicil. Poirot's expression softened. Yet you did more than imagine. He produced a small notebook. I found this tucked in your coat during last night's search. A script for your new play, but on the back are notes. The exact location of the hidden compartment in the clock and versions of the codicil's text. Hart's face went slack. Poirot addressed the group. Monsieur Hart here not only discovered the codicil, but sought to use it, first to preserve it under Lady Alcott's name, then to reverse it by forging Lady Alcott's signature and rewriting inheritance for his theatre fund. He turned back to Hart. When Lady Alcott retrieved the will, you silenced the clock, applied the poison to the decanter to eliminate her, and fled, leaving traces of your garment and your own notes behind. A slow gasp rippled through the room. Hart's shoulders sagged as he sank into a chair. It is true, he whispered. I intended only to secure the fund for my troupe. When she found the codicil restored, I panicked. Poirot nodded gravely. Your desperation led to 2 crimes, but justice prevails. He signaled Inspector Morton, who stepped forward to place Hart under arrest. You will answer for your deeds at the proper authorities. Turning to Sir Reginald, Poirot offered the will. Monsieur, your estate is once again unclouded by secret amendments. Lady Alcott's codicil stands as she intended, restoring the inheritance to Miss Carrington. He looked to Daphne. Mademoiselle, your future is secure. Daphne's eyes filled with gratitude. Poirot then addressed them all. This affair reminds us that treasures hidden in plain sight, be they clocks or wills, are as vulnerable to human frailty as the hearts that covet them. Yet with truth's steady tick, deception unravels. He bowed slightly. Case closed. As Colonel Fielding and Lady Moore exchanged relieved glances and Daphne embraced her uncle, Poirot collected the Mayuvi silk fragment and his notebook. The light in the library brightened, carrying with it the promise of clarity and resolution. Outside, the roses no longer whispered secrets, but within Carrington Manor, the steadiness of Poirot's little grey cells had restored order at last. Chapter 11. Tensions Rise. The drawing room, once a scene of genteel conversation and soft laughter, now crackled with unspoken accusations. The morning's revelations had fractured the fragile calm of Carrington Manor, leaving each guest on edge. Colonel Fielding stood beside the hearth, his gloved hands clenched at his sides. Lady Cecilia Moore hovered near the window, her eyes darting toward the manicured gardens as if seeking an escape. Miss Daphne Carrington remained close to her uncle, Sir Reginald, whose face bore the strain of a man betrayed. Inspector Morton lingered in the doorway, quill poised, while Hercule Poirot surveyed the room with his customary serenity, though behind his calm gaze, his mind raced. Poirot cleared his throat softly. Mes amis, our inquiries thus far have unearthed motives, exposed forgeries, and led to an arrest. Yet the clock's theft and the attempt on Lady Alcott's life were but prelude to deeper ramifications. Before we proceed to the final confrontation, let us allow tensions to surface, for in their release we may observe the true nature of those involved. He turned to Colonel Fielding. Colonel, you served with Sir Reginald in India. Now, your lingering desire for a scholarship has been overshadowed by these events. How do you propose to restore your honor? Fielding straightened and lifted his chin. I am a soldier, monsieur. My honor lies not in funds but in integrity. I shall cooperate fully. His voice was firm, yet Poirot noted the tremor in his lower lip. Next, Poirot addressed Lady Moore. Lady Moore, your correspondence with Monsieur Hart and your involvement in charitable endeavors placed you in a delicate position. How will you move forward, knowing you were mistaken in your trust? Cecilia's lips pressed into a thin line. I will not let this affair sully my charity's reputation. I shall publicly distance my institution from such intrigue. Her tone was clipped, and her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Daphne, clutching her uncle's arm, spoke quietly. I never imagined such malice could reach our home. I only wished to secure my inheritance, not cause such suffering. Sir Reginald patted her hand. My dear, this night has taught us that even the closest bonds can be tested. We will rebuild. His voice cracked with emotion. Poirot turned last to Mr. Lucien Hart, still seated, head bowed. Monsieur, you have been found guilty of forgery, theft, and attempted murder, or at least of conspiracy to commit these acts. Before Inspector Morton takes you away, is there anything you wish to say? Hart lifted his gaze, bloodshot eyes meeting Poirot's. I was desperate. My troops' livelihood depended on that fund. I believed Lady Alcott's codicil was unjust, but I never intended to kill her. His voice faltered, then steadied. I am sorry for the betrayal, the poison, everything. If only I had asked forgiveness rather than resorted to deceit. Poirot inclined his head. Regret is a luxury afforded only after one's actions bear consequences. Your remorse changes nothing now. Inspector Morton, you may take Monsieur Hart into custody. As Morton stepped forward, Hart rose and allowed himself to be detained. The room fell silent, save for the distant chime of a restored mantel clock, a gentle reminder that time, once stolen and silenced, marches on. Poirot observed them all, his posture relaxed but authoritative. Now, before we conclude, let us confront the remaining question. Why was Lady Alcott the intended victim, rather than merely an unwilling accomplice? Her role in restoring the codicil saved Miss Carrington's inheritance, yet by poisoning her, the perpetrator sought more than concealment. They sought retribution. He paused, letting the thought resonate. Lady Moore's gaze dropped. Colonel Fielding's expression grew guarded. Daphne's hand trembled. Sir Reginald looked as though he might protest, but instead he remained silent. Poirot continued. Lady Alcott discovered the will in the clock's compartment, an act of loyalty to you, Sir Reginald. Yet that discovery unveiled the truth about the codicil. The criminal's ire was not born of simple greed, but of wounded pride and a sense of betrayal. Their anger was personal, not merely financial. He turned to the colonel. Colonel, you envied Lady Alcott's authority over the charitable fund. Did you not feel slighted by her refusal to grant your request? Fielding's eyes flickered. I was disappointed, yes, but I would never have harmed her. Poirot's gaze softened. Perhaps not harm, but the criminal believed they had been wronged in matters both public and private. He looked at Lady Moore. Madam, you worked alongside Lady Alcott, yet your institutions diverged. Did you not feel overshadowed by her prominence? Cecilia swallowed. We differed in approach, yes, but I respected her. Poirot turned to Sir Reginald. And you, having trusted Lady Alcott implicitly, discovered that she had restored the codicil without informing you, thus altering your estate's future. Did that betrayal wound you as well? Sir Reginald's eyes glistened. It felt as though a companion had acted behind my back. With a final sweep of his gaze, Poirot addressed them all. Our culprit's motive combined envy, betrayal, and desperation, emotions none of us are strangers to. Yet only one allowed those emotions to fester into violence. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. We have unearthed the truths, administered justice, and witnessed the frailty of the human heart. Now, as tensions ease, let us prepare for the culminating moment, the gathering in the drawing room for the reveal. He stepped back, signaling the end of the psychological prelude. Take a moment, s'il vous plaît, to collect yourselves. In half an hour, we reconvene. As the suspects dispersed, some to pacing in corridors, others to silent reflection, Poirot remained by the hearth. He closed his eyes briefly, summoning the final pieces of his deduction. The stage was set. In the hush before the grand reveal, the charged atmosphere of Carrington Manor held its breath, awaiting the final act of this intricate drama. Chapter 12. The Confrontation. The flicker of evening light through the stained glass windows lent the Carrington Manor drawing room an almost ethereal quality, but the atmosphere remained taut with expectancy. The remaining guests, Colonel Fielding, Lady Cecilia Moore, Miss Daphne Carrington, and Sir Reginald Carrington, stood in a semicircle before Hercule Poirot, who paced slowly across the Persian carpet. Inspector Morton hovered discreetly by the door, ready to intervene at a moment's notice. Poirot paused and fixed his gaze on Colonel Fielding. Mon Colonel, you spoke of honor and integrity, yet you twice lingered in corridors unobserved. Pray tell, what did you overhear when you paused outside the study door last night? Fielding's jaw clenched. I heard voices. Lady Alcott's exclamation and your calm responses. Nothing more. But you did not enter, Poirot pressed, choosing instead to remain in shadow. Why? The Colonel swallowed. I wished only to observe, not intrude. Poirot inclined his head. Observation is the first step toward opportunity. He turned then to Lady Moore. Madame, you corresponded with Monsieur Hart regarding theatre funding, yet you arrived late to last night's gathering. What delayed you? Lady Cecilia's eyes flickered. A carriage wheel broke on the drive. I attended to the matter. An unfortunate accident, Poirot acknowledged. Yet when you finally arrived, you bore no signs of travel, no dust, no scuff. How so? She hesitated, lips pressed tight, then murmured, I returned swiftly through the servants' entrance. Precisely the corridor our thief used, Poirot observed. He walked closer to Daphne. Mademoiselle Carrington, you changed your gloves in the conservatory, yet claim to have lost the first pair. You insisted the fountain was the scene of the change. Yet no gloves were found there. Daphne's voice quivered. I searched but found nothing. Perhaps because you never went to the fountain, Poirot suggested, but instead brushed the curtain behind the mantel, transferring your scrap of silk. He tapped a gloved fingertip to his temple. I spoke earlier of that fragment matching your gown's lining, but the fragment also bore aniseed, the same scent as the poison liqueur. You had motive to distract us from the true poisoner. Daphne's face blanched. I only wished to protect my inheritance, not harm anyone. Poirot nodded, then raised his hands to silence the rising protests. And so we come to you, Monsieur Hart. His voice softened. You, who profess admiration for clockwork, who drafted detailed notes on its mechanism for your play, who replaced your gloves twice. What did you fear would be discovered in my study? Hart's eyes snapped to Poirot's. I feared nothing. But you entered that study alone, Poirot continued, and extracted the clock precisely at the moment the chime might have given you away. You silenced its ticking by pressing a pin into the gear train, a subtle trick only you would know. Hart's composure wavered. I admire precision. My notes detailed the gear ratios. Indeed, Poirot interjected. I found those notes tucked beneath your script in the billiard room, alongside your emptied decanter. He held up a torn page. It describes how to still the second wheel without damaging the escapement, a method you used last night. Hart's face drained of color. You saw that? Poirot smiled gently. My little grey cells observe all. Now, monsieur, why poison Lady Alcott rather than simply hide the will? What drove you from theft into attempted murder? Hart sank into a chair, shoulders slumped. Her restoration of the codicil meant my troupe would be denied funding indefinitely. When I saw her signature and realized she intended to enforce the will, I panicked. I thought if she were gone, none could overturn my forged version. Poirot nodded. So you staged the broken window, planted the soil-stained gloves, and slipped the note to confuse us. Yet you underestimated how fervidly one defends family secrets. He turned to the assembled company. Messieurs et mesdames, you have seen how motive, opportunity, and psychological pressure converge. Monsieur Hart believed his crime perfect, but in seeking to silence the clock, he revealed both its mechanism and his own hand. Hart buried his face in his hands. Inspector Morton stepped forward with measured calm. Monsieur Hart, I must ask you to accompany me. As the inspector led Hart away, Poirot addressed the others. Let us now restore order. The clock will be returned, its will recovered, and Lady Alcott's codicil honoured. He looked to Sir Reginald. I trust you feel justice has been served. Sir Reginald nodded, relief and sorrow mingling in his eyes. Lady Moore and Colonel Fielding exchanged glances, their tensions eased by the departure of the guilty party. Daphne stepped forward, her face brightening. Thank you, monsieur. You have saved me from ruin. Poirot inclined his head. It is my duty and my pleasure, for even the most intricate puzzle yields to method and insight. He surveyed the now quiet drawing room. Thus ends our confrontation. Soon all shall be as it was, except perhaps wiser for the ordeal. With a final graceful bow, Hercule Poirot departed the drawing room, leaving behind a household restored in truth and trust, yet forever changed by the tick of a clock and the workings of human nature. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. The corridors of Carrington Manor were hushed as Colonel Fielding escorted Monsieur Hart toward the servants' entrance. Inspector Morton followed, notebook in hand, while Poirot lingered beside the library door, awaiting their return. The grand house, still recovering from its revelations, seemed almost serene under the dim glow of the wall sconces. Yet, beneath that calm lay a current of urgency, an awareness that one final act might yet upset the careful resolutions made only hours before. As Hart passed the tapestry of the Battle of Balaclava, his footsteps faltered. He glanced back at Morton, lips twisting in desperation. With a sudden fluid motion, he bolted toward the nearest side door. Colonel Fielding reacted instantly, seizing Hart's arm, but the rogue detective slipped free, darting down the corridor lined with servants' doors. "Stop him!" Morton barked. The remaining guests and staff, drawn by the commotion, spilled from adjacent rooms. Hart barreled through the servants' vestibule, his eyes wild with panic. Ahead lay the low-lit corridor leading to the carriage house. If he reached it, he could vanish into the night, taking with him the only copy of the codicil, necessary evidence for Lady Alcott's safety. Poirot sprang forward, his polished shoes tapping on the stone floor. "Monsieur Hart, you will not escape so easily," he called, voice calm but carrying authority. Hart did not slow. Instead, he veered into the billiard room, scene of the earlier poison attack, his gaze fixed on the fireplace hearth. Colonel Fielding crashed after him, while Lady Cecilia Moore and Daphne Carrington peered anxiously from the hallway. Inspector Morton, regaining his composure, charged across the billiard room and lunged for Hart's coat. In that moment, Hart grabbed the poker from the hearth, raised it overhead, and swung. Fielding intercepted, knocking the poker aside. The iron tool clattered to the floor. Poisoner turned fugitive, Hart's face twisted with fury. Eyes darted to the roaring logs in the fireplace, to the hearth's glowing embers. With a desperate cry, he snatched a half-burned manuscript from the mantel, a copy of his play, then tossed it onto the hearth, spreading his fingers to scatter the pages. "Stop that!" Poirot shouted, rushing forward. He caught the edge of the codicil, peeking from Hart's coat pocket, and drew it to safety, tucking it into his own waistcoat. A fragment of silk drifted from Hart's cuff and wafted into the fire. Hart turned to flee again, but Colonel Fielding, heart pounding, blocked his path. Inspector Morton seized him roughly by the shoulders. "It's over, Hart," he growled. Hart twisted, throwing Morton off balance, and bolted toward the billiard table, intending to leap the overturned end. But Daphne Carrington, trembling yet resolute, dashed forward and pushed against the table's edge, destabilizing it. Hart collided with the table, sending balls clattering across the floor, and stumbled to the ground. Poirot arrived just as Hart tried to rise, poised to escape once more. With the grace of a practiced fencer, Poirot stepped in front of him, cane extended like a rapier. "Non, monsieur," he said softly. "Your game is finished." Hart dropped his gaze, chest heaving. Morton cuffed his wrists while Colonel Fielding retrieved the poker and leaned it back against the mantel. The manuscript pages smouldered in the hearth, but the codicil lay safe in Poirot's pocket. The hush that followed was heavy, punctuated only by the crackle of burning paper. Poirot placed a gloved hand on Hart's shoulder. "You attempted to destroy evidence, both your script and the codicil. Why risk everything to erase your own words?" Hart's shoulders sagged. "I panicked," he admitted in a trembling whisper. "I thought if I destroyed the notes, no one could prove it was me. I would vanish, and Lady Alcott's documents would be lost again." Poirot's gaze was gentle but firm. "Your panic reveals the truth you sought to conceal, and yet you overlooked one detail. The will's codicil is now recorded in official hands. It cannot be undone." He produced the codicil from his waistcoat and laid it on the mantel. "See how my ink has secured it." Inspector Morton stepped forward. Take him away, Colonel. I will see that he receives a fair trial. Fielding nodded and guided Hart toward the door, easing the man into reluctant submission. As they passed through the corridor, Lady Cecilia emerged from the shadows and paused before Poirot. I didn't know what else to do, monsieur, she spoke, voice trembling. When Monsieur Hart tried to bribe me, I feared the worst. Poirot inclined his head. Your instincts were correct to inform me. Had he succeeded, the codicil and the truth would have been lost. You played your part admirably. He offered her a reassuring smile. Daphne Carrington approached, eyes bright. Thank you, monsieur. Without your intervention, he would have escaped, and we would still be in darkness. Poirot turned to Sir Reginald, who had joined them in the billiard room. Mon cher hôte, the will is secure, Lady Alcott safe, and the criminal subdued. The desperate attempt to escape only underscores the thoroughness of our inquiries. Sir Reginald placed a hand on Poirot's shoulder. I cannot thank you enough. My niece, my estate, and my peace of mind are restored. The detective's moustaches twitched in a modest smile. Justice, once threatened, is sweetest when affirmed. Now let us restore order to this household and extinguish these embers of deceit. With the codicil safe and Hart in custody, the final pieces of evidence lay beyond reach of flame or flight. Outside, the moon slipped behind a cloud, but within Carrington Manor, the steady light of truth shone once more, guided by the unerring brilliance of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. The morning light filtered softly through the high windows of Carrington Manor's drawing room, illuminating both the restored mantel clock, its hands ticking steadily, and the anxious faces of those gathered. Colonel Fielding, Lady Cecilia Moore, Miss Daphne Carrington, and Sir Reginald Carrington stood arrayed around the hearth, while Inspector Morton and Hercule Poirot surveyed the scene. The house had settled into a cautious calm, yet beneath its surface, the final strand of evidence awaited discovery. Poirot cleared his throat and approached the mantel, brushing a finger along the gilded trim where the ornamental clock once stood. He paused before the small crack in the glass of the adjacent display case, an echo of the fracture once falsely presented as forced entry. With deliberate care, he withdrew a jeweller's loop from his waistcoat pocket and began examining the micro-etchings around the fissure. "My friends," Poirot announced, voice measured, "we have seen how motive and opportunity aligned in Monsieur Hart's case. Yet one final question has troubled my little grey cells. Why simulate the broken window so well in advance of the theft, only to lock it from within afterward?" He beckoned Inspector Morton forward. "Observe." Under the jeweller's loop, the crack's edges revealed fine parallel gouges, tool marks rather than the random stress lines of a genuine breakage. "These marks," Poirot said, "could only have been made by a slender, flat-bladed instrument, a clockmaker's screwdriver or a small crowbar introduced from within the room." He tapped his lip thoughtfully. "Monsieur Hart, you handle such tools in your studies of horology, but so does another person in our circle." Hart shifted uneasily. Colonel Fielding stiffened. Lady Moore's brows knit. Miss Carrington's hand tightened on her uncle's arm. Poirot turned to Lady Cecilia. "Madame Moore, you claim to have arrived late last evening due to a broken carriage wheel, yet your carriage driver confirms no such incident occurred on the drive." He paused, allowing the denial to falter. "You instead entered through the servants' corridor," he indicated the lock of that door, "and had access to the study while Monsieur Hart returned your carriage's wheel to the stables." Cecilia's face drained of colour. I admit I took that path, she stammered, but only to place the watch harmonies in my correspondence. Nothing more. Poirot's moustaches quivered. Yet I find the carriage wheel repair kit in your boudoir, tools matching these gouges. You had the means to simulate forced entry, and the motive to shift suspicion from Hart onto Lady Moore, who bore the petals and soil. He held up a small screwdriver, its handle bearing Lady Moore's crest. You planted this tool in the display case to implicate Monsieur Hart. He recovered a similar one during his studies, and left no marks of his own. Lady Moore's shoulders slumped. I intended only to protect my charity's interests and to misdirect suspicion from myself. But Hart's admission overshadowed my scheme. Poirot inclined his head. A layered deception, brilliant, until your own tools betrayed you. He placed the loop and screwdriver on the mantel. Now, while you staged the window break, Monsieur Hart carried out the clock's removal and the poisoning. Both of you sought control over the codicil's fate. He by force, you by misdirection. He turned to Colonel Fielding. Mon Colonel, you observed Lady Moore's movements last night and saw her pass through the study. You then aided in planting the evidence against Hart, believing him the greater threat to your scholarship ambitions. Fielding's gaze fell. You are not innocent of complicity. Fielding bowed his head. I thought by framing Hart I might secure the scholarship fund, but our conflicting rivalries blinded me. Poirot nodded gravely. Yet your actions, though misguided, were secondary to Hart's criminal intent. You facilitated deception, but he alone orchestrated theft and attempted murder. He faced the group. We have before us two conspirators, one who conceived the crime and another who aided its concealment. Sir Reginald stepped forward, voice firm. What of Daphne? She changed gloves in the conservatory. Was she complicit? Poirot smiled. Mademoiselle Carrington acted only out of fear, not fellowship. She believed her missing gloves and the silk scrap would incriminate her, not realizing the true culprits were 2 steps deeper. He lifted Daphne's lavender gloves. Your gloves bear neither soil nor motive, and your only transgression was misunderstanding the clue's significance. Daphne exhaled, relief mingling with lingering distress. I am grateful you saw my innocence. Poirot moved to Lady Moore and Colonel Fielding in turn. Madame and Colonel, you will face inquiries into your respective roles. Yet justice must be tempered by circumstance. Hart will stand trial for his crimes, and you will answer for conspiracy. Let us not forget that desperation often drives the best of people into folly. He turned finally to Sir Reginald. Mon cher hôte, your estate and family have endured much this night, but through clarity and compassion, we have preserved both legacy and life. He bowed slightly. The final piece of the puzzle, the tool marks, fell into place only when we examined the fracture itself. So, too, must we examine our own fractures to restore wholeness. Outside, the first birds began their morning songs, oblivious to the human drama within. Inside, Hercule Poirot closed his loop and offered a gentle nod. The game, as always, is complete. And though time may break us, truth mends what deceit tears asunder. With that, he departed the drawing room, leaving the household to untangle the aftermath of ambition, betrayal, and the enduring tick of justice. Chapter 15. The Final Gathering. Late afternoon light filtered through the tall drawing-room windows, casting gentle stripes of gold upon the assembled company. Sir Reginald Carrington had requested this final gathering to bring closure to the events that had upended his home. Around the circular mahogany table stood Colonel Ambrose Fielding, Lady Cecilia, Moore, Miss Daphne Carrington, and even Monsieur Lucien Hart. recently returned under guard for the formal recounting. Inspector Morton and Hercule Poirot took their places at the head of the table, ready to orchestrate the reconstruction of the night's mysteries. Poirot rose and bowed gracefully. Mes amis, this is the moment when facts coalesce into a coherent narrative. We have walked together through deception, betrayal, and violence. Now, we assemble the pieces before you so that each may understand how the crimes were committed and how justice prevailed. He gestured to the mantel, where the ornamental clock ticked solemnly. Let us begin at the scene of the first crime. All eyes turned to the clock. Poirot continued. During yesterday's fête, the thief planned to remove this clock at the hour of 9, knowing the chime would mask any disturbance. However, our culprit, Monsieur Hart, studied its mechanism days before, noting a weakness in the second wheel that allowed silent removal if one depressed the escapement pin. He held up a slender pin. This is the instrument he used, learned from his notes on horology, to still the clock's ticking without damage. Hart lowered his gaze. Poirot went on. At precisely 8:57, he slipped behind the velvet drapery and engaged the escapement pin, silencing the chime. He then unhooked the clock from its mount, gathered it in one arm, and navigated the rose-petal-strewn terrace, leaving soil and fragments upon his gloves. He entered the billiard room through the servants' corridor to distance himself from the scene. Lady Moore stepped forward, voice trembling. I saw him in the corridor and assumed he was a footman. Poirot inclined his head. Indeed. Captain Fielding, you did observe a figure at that hour, but believed it to be Lady Cecilia returning from the gardens. In fact, Lady Moore had passed through earlier, planting the broken window tool by the display case to misdirect suspicion toward Monsieur Hart. Lady Moore's cheeks flushed. I feared my charitable institution would suffer if the true theft were uncovered. Colonel Fielding bowed his head, and I, seeing an opportunity to direct blame, assisted, only to realize too late the depths of Hart's criminal intent. Poirot nodded. A shared culpability, though of different degrees. But let us return to the documents concealed within the clock. He retrieved the recovered will and codicil from a protective envelope. Within the clock's base lay your late uncle's original will, specifying the estate's transfer to the Carrington Charitable Trust. Lady Alcott discovered a codicil, her own amendment restoring the inheritance to Daphne. Hart forged a rival codicil, intending to defraud both parties. He placed the genuine codicil before Daphne. Mademoiselle, your rightful inheritance was thereby secured. Daphne's eyes welled with tears. She stepped forward, placing her hand atop the codicil. I am grateful to Lady Alcott for protecting this, and to you, Monsieur Poirot, for ensuring its authenticity. Poirot gestured to Lady Alcott, seated at a side table under the care of the physician. Lady Alcott's selfless act of restoration was repaid with attempted murder. The poisoned decanter in the billiard room contained a neurotoxin laced with aniseed, selected for its faint sweetness that masked bitterness. Hart, believing her silenced permanently, sought to eliminate the only obstacle to his forged codicil. Hart, escorted by Inspector Morton, bowed his head. I realize now the gravity of my actions. I never meant to kill, but I accept full responsibility. Poirot turned to Colonel Fielding. When Hart returned through the billiard room with the documents, he placed them in his coat. You followed him, intent on recovering the codicil for your scholarship cause. In your desperation, you overturned the billiard table to conceal your approach, only to create the scene of violence. Fielding's face was pale. "I only wished to prevent Hart's escape with the documents." "And so you did," Poirot acknowledged. "But in doing so, you aided in his flight, until guided intervention prevented his final attempt to burn the codicil. Indeed, it was Daphne who, in her innocence, unbalanced the table, allowing Hart's capture." He turned to her. "Your astuteness, though born of fear, played a crucial role." Daphne offered a timid smile. Poirot next addressed Lady Moore. "Your planting of the screwdriver at the display case redirected our suspicions. You then attempted to leverage Hart's guilt to secure goodwill for your charity. Yet when Hart panicked under pressure, you revealed his correspondence to me, which, in irony, helped confirm his guilt." Lady Moore bowed her head. "I see now how folly and fear can mislead, even the best of intentions." Poirot clasped his hands. "Thus we reach the final piece, the broken window simulation. Hart forced a crack earlier in the week, intending to manufacture forced entry. Lady Moore later resecured the latch to suggest internal complicity. The parallel gouges on the glass and the matching tool in her boudoir revealed her involvement." He paused. "Yet the primary crime, a theft of the clock and an attempted murder, rests solely with Monsieur Hart, whose knowledge of timepieces led to the crime's uniqueness." Sir Reginald inhaled deeply. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for this clear account. Nothing remains hidden." Poirot inclined his head once more. "Mes amis, the complexities of human motive have been laid bare. Greed, fear, and envy drove two of you into collusion. But the integrity of justice shone through. May this gathering mark the end of turmoil and the restoration of trust." The assembled guests exhaled collectively, relief and regret mingling in the air. Outside, the early evening sky deepened to lavender as the sun set. Within, Poirot allowed himself a small smile. His little grey cells had once again triumphed, weaving together the strands of deceit into a tapestry of truth. As the company dispersed, some to reconcile, others to reflect, Poirot lingered by the mantel clock. He placed a hand upon its gilded surface. "Time," he murmured, "reveals all secrets in its steady progression. Let us honor that gift." Thus concluded the final gathering at Carrington Manor, an assembly wherein illusion was dispelled, culpability determined, and the dignity of all was restored in the measured cadence of justice. Chapter 16. The Reveal. Late afternoon sunlight waned to a mellow glow in Carrington Manor's grand drawing-room. The assembled company, Sir Reginald Carrington, Colonel Fielding, Lady Cecilia Moore, Miss Daphne Carrington, and Inspector Morton, stood at measured intervals, each bearing the weight of the evening's revelations. At the circle's centre, Hercule Poirot adjusted his cravat, his expression serene yet commanding the fullest attention. "Mes amis," Poirot began, voice resonant in the hushed chamber, "we have walked together through the labyrinth of deception. The theft of the ornamental clock, the secret will and codicil, the attempt on Lady Alcott's life, and the collusion that threatened to conceal truth itself. Now I shall reveal, step by step, how each thread led inexorably to the culprit." He paused before Colonel Fielding. "Colonel, you observed suspicious activity at 8:57 p.m. on the marble terrace. You believed it to be Lady Moore, yet it was Monsieur Hart, garbed in dark evening wear, pressing the escapement pin to still the clock's chime." Poirot produced the slender pin. His notes, found in the billiard room, detail precisely this method, knowledge he gained as research for his dramatization of timepieces. He laid the pin on the mantel. He then faced Lady Moore. "Madame, Learning of Hart's plan, you feared for your charitable endeavors. You acquired clockmaker's tools under the pretense of carriage repair, broke the display case's glass to suggest forced entry, and relatched it to mislead us. Your screwdriver, bearing your family crest, matched the gouges we found around the crack. He held aloft the tool. This same instrument you placed at the scene would later implicate Hart, though he never used it. Poirot walked slowly toward Miss Carrington. Mademoiselle, you changed your gloves in the conservatory, believing your lavender pair too soiled by rose petals from the thief's path. Yet in your haste, you brushed against the velvet drapery, leaving a fragment of silk that absorbed the aniseed poison used against Lady Alcott. He displayed the mauve scrap. This scrap misled me briefly, yet upon closer scrutiny its weave and scent spoke only of a secondary actor. He turned back to the group. But the heart of the matter lies in the documents hidden within the clock. Sir Reginald's original will favoured the Carrington Charitable Trust. Lady Alcott restored a codicil returning the estate to Daphne. Monsieur Hart forged a rival amendment to direct funds to his theatre troupe. When Lady Alcott discovered the codicil, he panicked and added poison to her decanter, hoping she would vanish before revealing his forgery. Poirot paused, letting his words ripple through the silent room. Then he spoke directly to Monsieur Hart, who stood tall despite the gravity of his offences. Mademoiselle Alcott's death would have left your forged codicil uncontested. Your plan, stage a double deception, first the window break, then the theft, followed by the poisoning. Yet you overlooked two vital details: the unique method of silencing the clock and the presence of the period. Codicil notes in your coat pocket. Both betrayed your hand. Hart's shoulders sagged as he met Poirot's gaze. It is as you say, monsieur. I crafted every step, but failed to anticipate the precision of your deductions. Poirot inclined his head. And so the reveal is complete. You stand responsible for theft, forgery, and attempted murder. He turned to the others. Colonel Fielding and Lady Moore, your actions, though born of misguided loyalty and fear, amount to conspiracy. You shall answer for that as well. Sir Reginald exhaled, relief and sorrow etched in his features. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for illuminating every corner of this tangled affair. Poirot swept a final glance across the room. Let this case serve as testimony to the inexorable nature of truth. No matter how deftly one manipulates appearances, the steady tick of time and the application of reason will expose all secrets. He stepped back, lowering his hands. The reveal is concluded. A gentle chime sounded as the restored mantel clock struck 5. The room seemed to breathe again, its inhabitants forever altered by the clarity of Poirot's revelation. Outside, dusk deepened, but within Carrington Manor, all shadows had been banished by the light of incontestable truth. Chapter 17, Outcome and Justice. A hush settled over Carrington Manor as the final echoes of Poirot's revelation faded. The grand drawing room, with its high windows and gilded mirrors, bore witness to a gathering transformed by unveiled truths. Sir Reginald Carrington stood at the centre, flanked by Colonel Fielding, Lady Cecilia Moore, and Miss Daphne Carrington, each shadowed by the evening's confessions. Inspector Morton moved quietly to secure the forged documents and await the arrival of the magistrate's officers. Hercule Poirot, ever composed, surveyed the tableau with a look of solemn satisfaction. Mes amis, Poirot began, voice gentle yet resolute, our duty now turns from uncovering crimes to ensuring justice is served and wounds are tended. In this hour, let us consider the outcomes for each of you and the steps required to restore honor and harmony to this household." He gestured first to Monsieur Lucien Hart, who had been escorted back into the room under gentle guard. His once proud posture had softened into remorse as he faced the company. "Monsieur Hart," Poirot said, "your theft of the clock, your forgery of the codicil, and your attempt on Lady Alcott's life constitute crimes of grave severity. You will stand before the Crown Court on these charges. Yet I trust that your contrition and cooperation may be regarded with some leniency in light of your immediate confession and the evidence you preserved." Hart bowed his head. "I accept whatever fate awaits me, monsieur." Poirot inclined his head. "Very good. Inspector Morton will ensure your safe custody until you are conveyed to the appropriate authorities." Hart stepped forward and offered his wrist for the handcuffs, his eyes meeting Poirot's with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. As he was led away, the weight of unredeemed ambition lingered in the hush he left behind. Poirot then turned to Colonel Fielding. "Mon colonel, your involvement in aiding and abetting these crimes was born of loyalty, twisted by jealousy. You will be required to answer for conspiracy to obstruct justice, though your quick action in retrieving the codicil prevented its destruction, and for that you are partly to be commended." Fielding's gaze was steady as he nodded. "I sought only to protect my sister's scholarship legacy. I regret my misjudgment." "Regret is the first step toward redemption," Poirot replied. "I recommend you write to the Trust's board, confessing your complicity and offering restitution. Such transparency will aid in restoring your reputation." Fielding bowed in gratitude. Next, Poirot faced Lady Cecilia Moore. "Madame, your planting of the window break tool was a desperate attempt to safeguard your charitable institution. While your intentions concerned altruism, your methods violated the law. You must disclose these actions to the Charity Commission and cooperate fully with any ensuing inquiry." Lady Moore's voice trembled, but her posture was resolute. "I will do so, monsieur." "Bien," Poirot said kindly. "In doing so, you shall preserve the integrity of your cause." He turned then to Miss Daphne Carrington. "Mademoiselle, you endured great fear last night. Your panic led you to inadvertent misdirection, yet your heart remained true to your family. I find no need for punitive measures on your account. Instead, I encourage you to support Lady Alcott in her recovery and to foster the renewed trust within your household." Daphne's eyes glistened as she bowed her thanks. Sir Reginald stepped forward, relief mingling with sorrow on his face. "Monsieur Poirot, you have guided us through this labyrinth of treachery and emerged with clarity. What remains for me now is to heal the family rifts and to honor the memory of those wronged." Poirot smiled warmly. "Monsieur, your first act should be to formally reinstate Lady Alcott's codicil and to celebrate Daphne's rightful inheritance. A modest gathering of immediate family and trustees will signify the restoration of order. Furthermore, a public statement commending Lady Alcott's integrity may serve to counteract the scandal." Sir Reginald nodded. "I shall arrange it at once." Poirot then addressed Inspector Morton. "Inspector, please ensure that the clock and the original will remain in secure custody until the courts have ratified their status. I believe the clock itself, as a family heirloom, should return to its proper place upon the mantel, where it may serve as a reminder of justice's triumph." Morton inclined his head and departed to confer with his men. As the formalities drew to a close, Poirot swept his gaze over the diminished company. "We have seen how greed, envy, and fear can distort the noblest of intentions. But we have also witnessed courage, loyalty, and a steadfast commitment to truth. Let these lessons endure." He paused, drawing a deep breath. "Now may I invite you all to join me in the conservatory for a restorative cup of tea. Gentle conversation and a respite from turmoil will do us all good." Lady Moore gave a slight smile. "I would welcome that, monsieur." Colonel Fielding inclined his head. Daphne offered a thankful nod, and Sir Reginald laughed softly for the first time since the crisis had begun. Even the distant sound of Hart's departure seemed to carry a note of finality rather than sorrow. As they crossed the threshold into the moonlit conservatory, its glass panes reflecting the soft glow of lanterns, Poirot lingered for a moment, his gaze following the path of the clock's steady ticking echoing through the corridors. His little grey cells, having navigated another intricate puzzle of human frailty, were already at rest, satisfied by the symmetry of justice. In the gentle twilight of Carrington Manor, the promise of renewal and reconciliation shone brighter than any chandelier. And as the assembled company sipped their tea, the manor itself seemed to exhale, its elegant walls absorbing the echoes of suspense and emerging at last into a tranquil harmony that only truth could bestow. Chapter 18. The closing remark. The lanterns in Carrington Manor's conservatory glowed softly, casting gentle pools of light over the polished marble floor and the verdant foliage that climbed toward the glass ceiling. The tension that had gripped the household since the theft of the ornamental clock and the attempt on Lady Alcott's life had given way, at last, to a fragile serenity. Sir Reginald Carrington, Colonel Fielding, Lady Cecilia Moore, Miss Daphne Carrington, and the attending staff gathered with Hercule Poirot around a small, round table set for tea. Inspector Morton lingered discreetly by the door, while a hush of relief settled across the group. Poirot raised his teacup in a graceful imitation of a toast. "Mes amis, we have witnessed darkness in human hearts, but also light. Let us honor both by cherishing the truth that has prevailed." He sipped, eyes twinkling. "Ah, what a delightful blend. Thé à la bergamote, n'est-ce pas?" Sir Reginald smiled warmly. "A most fitting conclusion, Monsieur Poirot. Your guidance has been invaluable." Poirot set his cup down with gentle precision. "It is my vocation and my passion, monsieur. But now allow me a moment to encapsulate the lessons of our adventure." He cleared his throat, seating himself upright in his chair. "First, appearances can deceive. The broken window, the smeared gloves, the planted scrap of silk, all were intended to lead us astray. Yet when one attends to minute details, the angle of a scratch, the scent upon a fabric, the timbre of a chime, illusion unravels." Lady Moore nodded thoughtfully. "I see that now. My own actions, though well-intended, only compounded the confusion." "Precisely," Poirot agreed. "Second, desperation, even born of noble aims, can drive one to transgression. Colonel Fielding and Lady Moore, your fears for scholarship and charity warped your judgment, leading to conspiracy. But your eventual contrition redeemed you, demonstrating that honor lies not in perfection, but in the courage to admit error." Fielding bowed his head. "I shall never forget that, monsieur." Poirot smiled. "Third, and perhaps most vital, trust is the foundation of all relationships. Lady Alcott's trust in Sir Reginald, Daphne's trust in her family, and even Sir Reginald's. Trust in his guests were tested. Yet, by restoring the codicil, recovering the will, and upholding justice, we have reaffirmed that trust is the true heirloom of any household." Daphne reached out to clasp her uncle's hand. Sir Reginald's eyes glistened. Poirot rose to his feet, adjusting his waistcoat. And lastly, let us remember that time, like the little grey cells, never rests. Every moment offers a clue, every heartbeat a chance to discern truth from deceit. The clock upon the mantel now ticks steadily once more, its rhythmic certainty a reminder that, in the end, justice moves with as much precision as any finely crafted mechanism. He stepped toward the wide double doors that led back into the manor's corridors. The assembled company turned to bid him farewell. Poirot bowed deeply. "It has been my profound pleasure to serve you. May Carrington Manor flourish in prosperity and peace." He paused at the threshold, and as for me, I must depart. Another case awaits, another puzzle to unravel. I leave you with a final thought. Le plus petit détail est souvent le plus important. The smallest detail is often the most important. Cherish your little grey cells and let them guide you when circumstances seem most perplexing. He offered a mischievous wink. Au revoir. With that, Hercule Poirot strode down the carpeted hall, his polished shoes tapping a light staccato. The lanterns reflected in his crisply tailored coat, and his silver moustaches caught the glow one last time before he disappeared around the corner, off to his next adventure. In the silence that followed, the walls of Carrington Manor seemed to breathe a collective sigh. The dramatic tableau of suspicion and betrayal had folded back into the quiet dignity of domestic life. Outside, the garden roses swayed in the evening breeze, as though applauding the triumph of reason over wrongdoing. Within, Sir Reginald turned to his family and friends. "Shall we resume our evening celebration? After all, the hour is still young, and we have much to be grateful for." Lady Moore raised her teacup. "To truth, to trust, and to time." They clinked their cups together in a warm, triumphant chorus, and as the conservatory lanterns glowed overhead, Carrington Manor once more became a haven of harmony, a place where the chimes of an ornamental clock would no longer herald mischief, but simply mark the steady passage of time, untroubled and true.